I'm Ashley Webster.
I'm Kennedy.
I'm Jason Chaffetz, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023. I'm Jessica Rosenthal. The latest Fox News poll numbers are out, showing most Americans are ready for tougher gun rules and think abortion should be legal. How will the GOP navigate cultural issues ahead of next year's presidential election?
I personally like to go to root causes. I think there's a mental health epidemic in the country. We have not done nearly enough to address that problem.
We speak with Republican presidential hopeful Vivek Ramaswamy.
I'm Dave Anthony. As part of a week-long focus on AI, we look at the dangers of artificial intelligence, like what if it gets too smart for our own military?
I didn't get the sense we were anywhere close to having such a system that is fully in charge of everything like a movie and just launches missiles everywhere. I don't think that's like an easy thing to build, even if you want to build it.
And I'm Joe Concha. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
The latest Fox News poll finds 80% of Americans support requiring mental health checks on gun buyers, including 73% of Republicans. 80% support red flag laws, including 80% of Republicans. 8 in 10 support raising the age limit to purchase all firearms to 21, as do 67% of Republicans. And 2/3 of Republicans also support a 30-day waiting period. Fox business anchor Stuart Varney asked Republican Senator Rick Scott of Florida to react.
Look, this Fox poll on guns, that's not good news for Republicans.
Well, first off, I think we ought to enforce all the gun laws we have,
right,
but let's also figure out how to make people safe. I put a bill out this week. It's the Guardian School Act. Put armed guards in all of our schools. We have the resources.
The only thing most Republicans did not back in the poll was a so-called assault weapons ban. The Fox News poll also found a near high 56% think abortion should be always or mostly legal. More than half think families with transgender children being the target of political attacks is a major problem. And more than half also think transgender athletes competing on women's and girls' sports teams is a major problem. Some Republican presidential candidates are already navigating the landscape as they have been, and one of them likes Senator Scott's plan, but he has a twist.
So I think that it is unconscionable that we should have another school shooting in this country. Full stop.
Vivek Ramaswamy is the founder of a biotech company, author of Woke Inc. and now Capitalist Punishment, and a Republican candidate for president.
We can actually do something to protect our children. Let's do that thing. That's to put 3 armed security guards in every school across this country. I mean, it's laughable that we'll protect a lot of other things, the thousands standing around, the TSA in our airports, the banks in this country, the shopping malls. If we say we want to protect our children, we don't protect our schools in nearly the same way. And whatever happens with gun laws, you're going to have criminals that have their hands on guns for whatever reason. The deranged psychology of people who commit these heinous acts draws them to schools. We now know that. Let's protect our most valuable assets in the country, our children. Let's do it by putting those 3 armed security guards in every school across the country. Now, on my vision and my plan, I don't think we're going to have to spend more money to do that. We can spend less money to do it by shutting down the U.S. Department of Education that really should have never existed in the first place. And I think that that's one of the features of my pursuit of the presidency or my campaign, and hopefully our model of governing, is that we will gut the administrative state, the fourth branch of government that should have never existed. But we'll start with the lowest hanging fruit. And the Department of Education is probably among the lowest hanging fruit to shut down that agency. And we've done the math on this. For less than 25% of their current budget, we could actually put 3 armed security guards in every major school across the country. And that's what I intend to do.
Well, shutting down the Department of Education is another podcast, which I hope we'll have. Yeah. But the Fox News poll also showed support among Republicans is anywhere from 60 to 80% on some tougher gun-related items, including a 30-day waiting period to purchase, requiring mental health checks to purchase, raising the age limit to 21 for all firearm purchases. What do you make of these numbers? Do you see a shift here?
Well, look, I haven't seen that polling. I do think that there's clearly a conversation in the country about how we abate the mass shooting incidents. I personally like to go to root causes. I think there's a mental health epidemic in the country. We have not done nearly enough to address that problem. I think a lot of this starts now with young people in the age of the internet, particularly in the age of social media, fueling their existing mental health frailties. I think that is something that we need to step up and address with courage. We are yet to do it as a country. And so one of the things that I've said is that I would actually ban addictive social media in kids under the age of 16. I think it's fueling a lot of that crisis of self-confidence, depression, anxiety, and so on, spreading across the country like wildfire. Here's one of the things we know is many of the people, probably nearly all of the people who have committed these heinous acts are actually mentally unstable, that are deranged and suffer from psychological instability. Well, let's go to the root causes and address that. First of all, if you can't smoke an addictive cigarette by the age of 18 or have an addictive drink of alcohol by the age of 21, I don't think you should be able to use an addictive and toxic social media product at the age of 15 or 14 or 13 either. Yet that's rampant across the country. I also think that most of these mass shootings are committed by people who grew up in fatherless households. Family formation, the lack of the stable family is a big problem in our country. Let's actually get to the root causes. Look, we have a drug epidemic in the country too, illegal drug epidemic. Banning drugs hasn't actually stopped that from happening. I don't think that the same principle is likely to apply with respect to guns either. I think it's likely to see the same result there. And so I think you have to get to root causes rather than symptomatic therapy.
Another recent Fox News poll, even if you haven't seen it, it asked people about some transgender-related issues. I know you had a moment with Chuck Todd, a Sunday talk show host, over the weekend, and he pushed you on this notion that there are two genders, asking you if you're sure and pointing out that you're not a medical doctor. And he insisted that science indicates that gender is on a spectrum. And in that context, I wanted your reaction to this Fox poll that found 57% of respondents think political attacks on transgender families are a problem. And at the same time, 54% think it is also a problem to have transgender athletes on women and girls sports teams. In other words, it sounds like there are, I guess, a myriad of feelings when it comes to some of these issues we're talking about regarding transgender folks. As president, where do you go with this issue as you talk about it? I mean, you are talking about it. A lot of people are talking about it. If you're president, is there a rule? Is there an executive order? What happens?
Yeah, so look, I think that protecting children, I think, is a big part of this. I think by executive order, and I think that legislation is also a parallel option. We're looking at the different legal routes, but here's the policy, is that just as you can't get a tattoo by the age of 18 in any state in this union, because we don't want kids to make a body-altering change that's permanent that they will later regret, I don't think we should allow minors, kids under the age of 18, to undergo genital mutilation or to undergo chemical castration through puberty blockers either. That's differentiating kids from adults. People say, well, you live in a free country. Shouldn't you be free to be transgender or do what you want to your body? Yes, as adults. I think that's part of the bargain of living in a free society, but not kids. Kids aren't the same thing as adults. And part of what's going on with this transgender movement is, again, it goes back to this mental health epidemic in America. When a kid says, I am of a gender that is different than my biological sex, that is a mental health disorder. That's how we've always treated it for most of our national history. It's only a very recent phenomenon that we have started to say the thing we're supposed to do is to affirm that kid's confusion. That is not compassion. That is cruelty. And I think that the idea that we're somehow being kind to these kids by allowing them to make decisions, in many cases, that leave them no happier after the fact, sometimes even worse off, suggests that we're failing to address the root cause of their unhappiness and of their struggle, while leaving them worse off by putting them through surgery or chemical castration that's irreversible. I had the opportunity to meet two young women. It was by coincidence, really, that I ran into them when we were in New Hampshire, who regret those decisions that they made. One young woman's case at the age of 13 that she made to cut off both her breasts, and the other young woman, she had also had a hysterectomy, removed her uterus as part of her gender transition, went through chemical intervention. Those young women will never be the same again, and that's a sad story, even though they wish they'd never done it. And I think that the fact that we live in a society now that takes kids who are lost and going through a struggle, and instead of helping them, are effectively punishing them physically, is something that history will not look kindly upon. I think it will look upon what we're doing right now as inhumane. And yet, most inhumane acts that were committed in history were committed by people at the time who thought they were doing the right thing. Let's remember that. And I think we have to ground ourselves in truth rather than the artifice that governs today.
Briefly, before I let you go, For those who don't know you, you do have a background in tech and finance, and that intersects with the pharmaceutical industry. I want some of your insight, given your tech background and knowledge, with AI. It's my entire Twitter feed is, if you're not using AI, you are falling behind. And then, of course, the other half of my Twitter feed is, we should all stop using AI or we're going to die. So I wonder if over the next 18 months, if AI becomes an even bigger part of the conversation, how do you weigh in? Do you weigh in differently maybe than any other candidate can?
Well, look, I have I've built a drug company, a biotech company that's developed investigational medicines. 5 of them are FDA-approved products today that I had worked on personally. And part of what I built was actually a division that used AI to discover new drugs. So I do have a perspective on this. Here's what I'll say. I think that there are unforeseen risks of widespread usage of AI that are widely underappreciated today. It's like the equivalent of conducting gain-of-function research to prevent a global pandemic. We now know that contributed to creating a global pandemic. Well, I think that in the name of helping humanity, I think that unfettered usage of AI could pose some serious risks to humanity. But here's the other thing I will say, is that the U.S. cannot voluntarily just adopt some ban without China agreeing, or even constraint without China agreeing to the same thing, because that would just be an exercise in futility. It's kind of like we learned it for gain-of-function research because they funded it through the back door abroad in places like China. That didn't stop the pandemic from coming to the United States. And so I think that it would be a mistake for the U.S. to fall behind by voluntarily adopting constraints that China does not. But I do think that through leadership, akin to the framework of nuclear non-proliferation, we could differentiate the kinds of AI that present real risks to human beings versus the kind that don't, and adopt those limitations in synchrony with places like China, rather than putting ourselves at a competitive disadvantage. And that's what makes this issue so complex. It's also why I think it's important to have a president in the White House who has not only a deep existing understanding, because there's going to be plenty of issues we don't all understand that are going to have to learn about, but has an innate, earnest curiosity to get to the bottom of what's actually happening, rather than skating at the level of surface level talking points based on what's fed to you by a class of managerial advisors. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm in this race. I'm the first millennial ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. I've lived the full arc of the American dream. I understand what it takes to succeed in this country and how to spread that to others who want to live the dream that I have. And I think we can revive that for our country, but I don't think it's going to be done by a standard politician.
Vivek Ramaswamy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This is Joe Concha with your Fox News commentary. Coming up.
The rise of AI.
All this week, we are focusing on the rise of AI. Today, we look at the dangers.
AI is amazing. It's going to help society in many different ways. It can also kill us.
Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu and other lawmakers are considering how to handle and regulate the growing technology, after hearing from some tech leaders who are advocating we pause the development of AI. Republican Senator Josh Hawley says,
when you see folks who have been big AI proponents, including people like Elon Musk, warn that maybe there's a big problem here, I think that's a wake-up call.
It's not just Elon Musk of SpaceX and Tesla and Twitter fame. Just yesterday, a man considered by some the godfather of AI, Jeffrey Hinton, told the New York Times he's left his job at Google to add his voice to critics worried that artificial intelligence could put people out of jobs or be a tool for misinformation. Or, as the late, great Stephen Hawking warned years ago, AI could spell the end of the human race. Writing AI could get so smart machines might have intelligence that exceeds humans to a greater degree than our intelligence now compared to a snail.
AI is just the next tech. And when we invented electricity, we started making movies about Frankenstein, how electricity is going to come back and kill us. And it always happens, right?
Pete Kasperowicz is politics editor for Fox News Digital.
No one's quite sure what all the good is, and no one's really quite sure how bad the bad will get. So that's where we're stuck. And by the way, lawmakers are in the same spot. They don't quite know what to make of it yet. They don't always do this, by the way, too. So in some ways, it's kind of heartening. They're asking experts what to do. A lot of people might have heard or saw that Elon Musk was up meeting with Schumer last week. In the same week, McCarthy on the House side had experts up from MIT. So they are at least asking a lot of the people that we would say are the right people to ask. What should we worry about? What should we do?
Yeah, and I know Congress is always accused of being behind when it comes to technology. Even when the internet started in the 1990s, they were behind in regulation on that. There is a push to try to get a pause on AI development. I don't know exactly how you do it, but what's the idea?
The idea is let's wait before the bad happens. And I think we've already in the last month or two heard enough that it's not going to happen like that. We've heard a lot of, in fact, most people in Washington, I think now agree you can't really do a pause. You could fight for one, but with who? Do you have to get China involved? I mean, you see what it's like to work with China on environmental stuff and all trade and all these other things. If you got a deal, would it be verifiable? And then what would you get if you did have the pause? A lot of people fear that you'd end up giving China the heads up and you'd have, it's funny, there's already early talk of like you'd have a China-based AI maybe as the standard. That's the risk you run, as opposed to what some are calling a democratic AI, an AI developed by the West that's more fair and loving and caring.
But at the same time, I mean, China's famous for stealing our secrets and our technology anyway. I mean, they probably will have AI to steal our AI.
That's been the early talk now that makes the most sense, that you don't do a pause in development, but you try to starve China of the technology used to make an AI system. And that's something Biden has come up with already. That's something some people in Congress have proposed legislation already to put the brakes on in that area. And that's just called export controls. And that's just, when you have a sexy new tech, let's keep it here.
There's also this fear that AI could someday get so smart that it would help us fight wars and launch our missiles and take over our weaponry. I mean, the military is working with AI. How serious a concern is that, and how much is Congress really going to focus on it?
We've heard someone testify to Congress that we might be thinking of this in a little bit of a cartoon way. AI is not something you can just Velcro onto a missile and suddenly it's an AI missile. You know what I mean? It's a complete tech overhaul. It's not an easy add-on for a lot of weapons. I talked to people at CENTCOM, which is one of the geographic combatant commands that deals with issues in the Middle East. And I didn't get the sense we were anywhere close to having such a system that is fully in charge of everything like a movie and just launches missiles everywhere. I don't think that's like an easy thing to build, even if you want to build it. They say they don't want to build it. I think it's far away. And at least publicly, our military is saying they're not even interested. They want to make sure people are in charge of this the whole way through.
Now, there's a move in Congress to make sure the military makes sure that people are in charge.
We want to make sure that there is a human in this process of launching a nuclear weapon if at any point in time we need to launch a nuclear weapon.
That's Republican Congressman Ken Buck. He is co-sponsoring a bill that has Democrat support. It's called the Block Nuclear Launch by Autonomous Artificial Intelligence Act to deal with an AI fear that many of us have.
A lot of us are familiar with the Terminator movies and Skynet essentially taking over and automating the launch of weapons.
Sergio Rodriguera Jr. is co-founder of Straylight Systems, an AI company.
Where Congress is concerned is, I think, where they see potential dangers and challenges, they'd like to start thinking about and developing these guardrails and policies before the technology advances. I think we're still several years away from potentially that danger, but I think Congress on both sides of the political aisle are starting to think about procedures to start designing.
But what do we have to do to prevent AI from outthinking us and becoming too intelligent?
I think there's two ways to look at that. So for the military, we use a foundation called the OODA loop in a lot of our processes, right? So that's to the observing, to orient, decide, and act. Where, to your point, AI and machine learning are introducing incredible advancements in terms of sensors and information. In fact, it's a little bit of overload. That's one of the challenges that the military has, is harmonizing and normalizing data, because you have now sensors, you have drones, you have satellites. All of that information is continuously and exponentially growing. So that's one area where AI can accelerate the operationalization, synthesis of all of that information. What is the interpretability and understanding that a commander who may not necessarily be an AI expert, the logic that the AI is doing, can that be relayed? And again, this has to be done in real time, right? Because a senior commander has to make these decisions in real time. So can we develop that?
Right. So if we get to the point where AI detects something suspicious or a threat and advocates the launch of weapons, we still want to make sure that a human ultimately makes the final call, right?
Correct, 100%.
And I think the ultimate guardrail, right?
Right. When you say human in the loop, right, that is so when we go back to these processes of how the military, let's say in an engagement, right, because when you're talking about a nuclear missile launch, there are a number at high levels, right? You're talking about combatant commanders, you're talking about the joint staff, you're talking about these large organizations that have to make decisions. Obviously, the White House and others.
There is also a lot of concern. Now we see deep fakes, these images online, videos online that make it look like someone's saying something or doing something, and it's not them at all. And it's getting harder and harder to detect one of these deep fakes. How serious a threat is that, in your opinion?
I think it's a very serious concern. My friends in the media who know this really well, being first in a lot of cases is the goal. And so, God forbid, you have a deep fake that shows something that they want to put on air right away. But to your point, we do not currently have the technology that can detect or authenticate that a video or image is real. That's a giant concern when you think of geopolitics, and again, this race that we're all in to, in many cases, to be first.
Can we train artificial intelligence to detect when a deep fake was created by AI?
There are ideas around developing almost like a fingerprint or signature, right? That could detect that. I think. As an entrepreneur, I'm an optimist. I think we can and we should develop these kinds of technologies to authenticate and ensure that image or video is valid.
I know you also deal artificial intelligence in the financial world. North Korea, China, some of our adversaries, Russia, they're constantly trying to fraudulently get at money here in the United States, try to steal business secrets. How well are they able to use, or can they use AI against us?
Putting aside the issue of cryptocurrency, where there are a lot of questions, to your point, I think on the traditional financial side, the problem has been with payment systems. And so, I've been involved in looking and trying to address and use AI and machine learning to try to solve that problem. Could AI machine learning better detect, or at least try to, in this case, stop potential adversaries from attacking, users, right? Consumers who are using these systems to pay for, goods and services. Unfortunately, we have not yet developed a solution. And as payment systems get more advanced, unfortunately, bad actors and these adversaries are also getting better equipped to target individuals.
You said crypto. I mean, how involved is digital currency in that fraud?
Our government, our Treasury Department has sanctioned a number of individuals, but unfortunately, if that individual overseas is using a different rail, a different way to circumvent, move money around the system, there isn't much that, again, traditional sanctions can do to stop that.
Tell me a reason I should be less fearful of AI. You work with the technology, you're in the industry. Tell me a reason why people should be less concerned.
I truly think, and I think those who are like me feel that AI is really an enabler, and be able to provide not necessarily the best answer or what to do in terms of an action, but tee up or at least provide the best outcome and potential scenario or outcome that you might want to do.
Sergio Rodriguera Jr., co-founder, Straight Light Systems, an AI company. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And for more stories like this and on the rise of AI, go to foxnews.com/AI.
Hey, it's Will Kane, co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend. Join me as I share my thoughts on a wide range of topics, from sports and pop culture to politics and business.
The Will Kane Podcast. Subscribe and listen now at foxnewspodcasts.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Joe Concha.
What's on your mind?
Here we have an historically unpopular president in Joe Biden. And here we have two challengers in Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Marianne Williamson, who somehow are polling at nearly 30% combined in challenging Biden for the nomination. Yet the Democratic National Committee has already declared that Joe Biden absolutely will not debate in the primaries under any circumstances. This despite the fact that 70% of voters don't want him to run, including a majority of voters in his own party, Democrats. And the reason why the DNC is already declaring this is to protect Biden from himself, just as his handlers do with the press almost every day when he doesn't take questions and doesn't hold press conferences. By the way, he hasn't held a press conference all year. We're talking the solo variety that are more than just a joint press conference where you're asked maybe two questions. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is saying he ain't going to debate either. He says his lead is insurmountable, so why even bother? This despite the fact that his potential primary rivals, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, Senator Tim Scott, South Carolina, haven't even announced their candidacies yet. Both Biden and Trump want a coronation before the nomination. I think most Americans would say, nope. You have to earn it, Mr. Trump, Mr. Biden. This is all part of the process. You have to debate your opponents. You have to lay out your arguments, and you have to do so on a national stage. Anything else short of that, let's call it what it is. It's cowardly. I'm Joe Concha.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. And now, stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. Listen ad-free on Fox News Podcasts Plus on Apple Podcasts. And Prime members can listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. Kudlow on Fox Business is now on the go for podcast fans. Get key interviews with the biggest business newsmakers of the day. The Kudlow podcast will be available on the go after the show every weekday at foxbusinesspodcasts.com or wherever you download your favorite podcasts.